Alright everybody, welcome back to our Q&A series, and in this episode we're asking who was Cain's wife. You'll remember from Genesis. And so the Bible does not specifically state who Cain's wife was, but it provides enough information for us to deduce the most likely answer. And based on scripture, Cain's wife must have been either his sister, niece, or a close relative such as a great niece. To understand this conclusion, we need to look at the biblical account of humanity's early history. And so Cain is introduced as the firstborn son of Adam and Eve, right out of the Garden of Eden, followed by his brother Abel. And so after Cain killed Abel, Genesis will mention that Cain had a wife. In Genesis chapter 4, verse 17, it will say, "And Cain had sex with his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And he built a city, and called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch." And so the Bible does not detail the timeline of Cain's life or specify his wife's origins. However, there's some key facts to consider. Adam and Eve were the first humans created. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 will say, "So God created man in God's own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them." Genesis 3:20 states, "And Adam called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living." And so all human beings are descendants of Adam and Eve. Therefore, Cain's wife had to be one of these descendants. And so Adam and Eve had multiple children. In Genesis chapter 5, verse 4, will say, "After he begot Seth, the days of Adam were 800 years, and he had sons and daughters," plural. And so Cain and Abel, they're the only named children of Adam and Eve at this point in the narrative. But Genesis chapter 5 verse 4 will confirm that they had other sons and daughters. They just were not important to the story, apparently. And so these additional children provided the population that was necessary for Cain to take a wife. The other evidence that we'll look at is that Cain was afraid of others after he killed his brother Abel. Genesis chapter 4 verse 13 and 14, "And Cain said to the Lord, My punishment is greater than I can bear. Surely you have driven me out this day from the face of the ground, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it will happen that anyone who finds me will kill me." So Cain's fear is going to indicate the existence of other people at that time, likely his other siblings, nieces, nephews, or other descendants of Adam and Eve. And so these early generations obviously had to deal with intermarriage. And so since Adam and Eve were the first humans, and obviously also genetically perfect, their children had no option but to marry close relatives, such as siblings or nieces. And so this practice, though it was prohibited later, was necessary for the continuation of the human race initially. And so intermarriage was not forbidden initially in the Bible. God did not forbid intermarriage within the families until about the time of Moses. So several thousand years later, after the Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so in Leviticus 18 verse 6 will say, "None of you shall approach anyone who is near of kin to him to uncover his nakedness. I am the Lord." So at the time of Cain, interfamily marriage was not sinful because there was no other options for humanity's continuation. And so the genetic code of Adam and Eve was free from corruption caused by sin and mutations. We are on the other end of that 6,000 years later. So as the first humans, they were created perfectly by God. And we get that from Genesis 1:31. God saw everything that he had made, and indeed it was very good. So the evening and the morning were the sixth day. So over time, however, the effects of sin brought sickness, disease, and genetic deterioration. And Romans 5:12 will say, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned." And so in the early generations of humanity, the lack of significant genetic defects allowed close relatives to intermarry without the risks that we associate with incest today. And so, as sin's effects accumulated throughout the generations over time, God's law prohibited these relationships to protect humanity from the harmful consequences of genetic mutations. And so, the account of Cain and his wife is going to demonstrate God's sovereignty in the early development of human history. Despite Cain's sin of murder, God preserved him and allowed him to continue his lineage. Genesis 4:15 says, "And the Lord said to him, Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him." So Cain's descendants, like all of humanity, played a role in God's overarching plan of redemption. Even in the face of sin, God's purpose for mankind continued, eventually leading to the coming of Jesus Christ. And so Luke 3, verse 38 will say, "The son of Enosh, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, the son of God." And so the Bible's silence on the specific identity of Cain's wife does not leave us without answers. Based on Scripture, Cain's wife was one of Adam and Eve's descendants, likely a sister or a niece. At the time, intermarriage was necessary and it was not forbidden, as the genetic code was pure and free from the significant defects caused by the fall. Over time, as sin corrupted humanity further, God instituted laws to prohibit intermarriage within the families. Cain's story is a reminder of both the seriousness of sin and God's grace in preserving humanity despite our failures. Through the line of Adam and Eve, including their children like Seth in Genesis 4, verse 25 and 26, God's redemptive plan unfolded, ultimately culminating in the salvation that was offered through Jesus Christ. You can find more study material at TaylorBibleStudy.com.